This is Platemark. My name is Ann Shafer, and I am your host. I'm an independent curator specializing in prints and printmaking. This is Series 3 of Platemark, a series of interviews with really fun, smart, amazing people who occupy various roles in the print ecosystem. Today's guest is Allison Tolman, who is a second-generation dealer of contemporary Japanese prints. She is in New York as a private dealer. You have to make an appointment to get to her. And her dad is still at it in Japan, believe it or not, in Tokyo. So they have quite a legacy going on there. She is a delight and has some really wonderful artists in her stable, and I think you'll enjoy getting to know them. All right, let's see. Housekeeping. I identify as a cishet white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. Images we talk about will be over on the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. You can also do me a favor and hit the support and donate button and support your favorite podcaster. That would be me. It's just me doing this. Your support would be very, 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 very much appreciated. So go do it. All right, I think that's it. Let's get rolling. Allison, it's wonderful to see you. Thank you for coming on Platemark today.
I am really glad to be here. I actually have been listening to a lot of the episodes. I have been for a while anyway, but I think it is incredible how you are meeting and greeting all these people in the print community.
Yeah, I'm just trying to spread the love, really. Part of it is showing people that we're all not intimidating people and we just have really cool jobs. And two, also to show the range of ways you can be in this ecosystem. There's so many places you can sit and work.
And I think probably that is where I come in, because certainly, although Japanese prints, they're incredibly famous, right? I mean, it is very rare to meet somebody who hasn't at least seen some depiction of the Great Wave of Hokusai. But a lot of people really don't know how different Japanese prints are, especially contemporary Japanese prints are from other prints right now.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Correct?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. But before you go any further, though, why don't you introduce yourself?
I am Allison Tolman. I am the director of the Tolman Collection of New York and a second-generation dealer. My parents, Mary and Norman Tolman, founded the Tolman Collection of Tokyo in 1972. My dad had been sent to Japan by the Department of State. He was a junior diplomat working as one of our emissaries of soft power. I call it propaganda, but it was called soft power at the time, whereby our government encouraged people from other countries to come to the United States and see what kind of cultural exchange programs existed. My parents got to meet a ton of artists and musicians, and in the diplomatic world, definitely wives were certainly a big part of this team. My parents started collecting Japanese prints by the artists whom they met. And one day my father came home and said, "I've quit my job and we're going to now have an art gallery." And I was, I would have been 12 at the time. And my first thought was, if daddy's going to be working from home, if I get into trouble at school, he'll pick up the phone and he'll know first. So 52 years later, my parents' gallery is still continuing in Tokyo, it's a remarkable accomplishment for any foreign company in Japan, but especially for a tiny art business. It is really a tribute to my parents' vision and to the fact that so many artists thought, these Americans are wonderful and they want to promote our work and we're going to sign up with them. And many of the artists with whom we started, and unfortunately there are a few who have passed away, but a lot of the people whose work my parents started with are still really a mainstay of our gallery.
That is amazing. So your parents have lived in Tokyo for this whole time?
My dad is still there. My mom returned to the United States about 20 years ago.
Oh, okay. All right. And at 12 years old, did you stick your toe in and say, this is kind of cool, maybe I'll check it out? And then when did you sort of dive in?
Well, as you know, when one is a tween or a teenager, the last thing you ever want to do is have anything to do with what your parents do, because that is just the kiss of death. But my sister and I were constantly taken to artist studios. We could ask questions of the artist that as an adult, sometimes one is reluctant to do. I remember asking Toko Shinoda, who is this, she passed away 2 years ago, but she's this brilliant, trailblazing abstract calligrapher and painter and lithographer. And her work is minimalist. And I said to her, well, how hard could that be? And, instead of snapping at me because I was, 13 or 14 at the time, she said, it doesn't take long, and yet it takes a whole lifetime, which is a
Oh.
very calm and soothing thing to say to somebody. And I reminded her of this remark, several decades later. And she said, yeah, well, if you'd been an adult and asked that question, I would have bit your head off. But I think the artists really enjoyed that, we were there in their studios and watching them. But yet again, it's something that I never thought of doing. I mean, art dealers, our world is so volatile, I think is the right word. I mean, you can have really great months when you have a successful art fair and everybody loves the prints and you sell everything and you're so happy. And then you can have an art fair or you can have people come and look at prints and think, I mean, this is nice, but well, I'm really thinking more of an investment, which is disheartening. And then you just have to move on and think, well, I love them. And I'm not a greengrocer. These things don't spoil. They just keep on being beautiful every single time. And, that's one of the amazing things. And one of the things that I always like to tell people what makes contemporary Japanese print so special is that the artists, for the most part, do all the work. So from simple things like ordering the paper and the ink. I mean, forget the sheer creativity of coming up with whatever design you're going to put down on the plate. But it's they do everything, and it's probably one reason why the prints are so accessible in terms of price is that there aren't a lot of middle people involved.
Huh. It is a long game, this whole art dealer thing. But historically, the model of doing all of it yourself, from ordering the paper and the inks, that it's a radical change, right?
It was certainly radical. I mean, they say that the very first person in Japan, at least, who had this epiphany was Yamamoto Kanae. I think the first print that he ever did all alone was either dated from 1905 or 1906. And the Japanese had gone through these wonderful iterations of, the very, very first woodblock prints were from an empress in the 8th century who had commissioned Buddhist prayers. And the quickest way to reproduce these prayers was through woodblock printing. So that's from the 8th century. And then, people had made prints, always woodblock. But it took a while for the Japanese to learn about these new printing processes, especially because the country was shut for several hundred years. But when people started traveling to Europe and America and realized, oh, there's lithography and there's screen printing and etching. These really didn't come into anybody's ken, I would say, until the 19th century,
Oh,
or
wow.
late 19th century.
Wow. And they've caught up really fast.
Yeah.
I mean, I have so many questions, Allison. One, you work out of your house, so you're a private dealer at this point.
Correct.
Yeah. And is it the same company as the Tolman Collection in Tokyo, or are you guys separate entities now?
We are separate entities. I have been toying with the idea of having a gallery for many, many years. But as we all know, well, I live in New York, and rent in New York is absurdly expensive. And the idea that I could work as a private dealer and have my own schedule and then participate in as many art fairs as I could has been a business model that so far works really, really well for me. I'm incredibly grateful to my sister who rebuilt my website during the pandemic at a time when I was forced to stay home, couldn't budge. And she was very well aware that, there were all of these dealers had websites and that's how people were selling. So she rebuilt my website. And I think, and it's a lesson that I'm still learning, is that one of our great assets, we Tolmans, is that we know the artists whose work we represent so well because we've spent so much time with them. Having grown up in Japan, I speak and read and write Japanese, so there's no communication problem. If I'm at an art fair and somebody has a question about a print, well, maybe because of the time difference, I can't pick up the phone and call them immediately. but I can call them pretty soon thereafter and get a response right away. And I think to me that's really fulfilling. I mean, I'm sorry I can't correspond with Hiroshige and Hokusai, but I can't. But the artists whom I know, I can speak to directly, and the personal touch is something that's really important to me.
Yeah, I think that's something that's probably falling by the wayside with all of the internet buying that seems to be happening more and more frequently. It's like you're almost like a concierge, you know? It's a very
Right.
personal, yeah. It's a totally different model and it's delightful.
Well, some people may not like it. I mean, I've had my fair share of people who say, but no, 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 I want this shade of lime green for over the couch. I have had little skirmishes with those kind of people. I mean, I'd love to help you if I could, but in the meantime, you should really appreciate why this artist is doing what they're doing. And it is not in that shade of lime green.
Nor are they willing to, change their ink color just for you.
Right,
Yeah, my
right,
husband's always asking, can you do it in turquoise? I'm like, Chris,
right.
please stop asking the artists to do a different colorway, please.
But it's also interesting, and I'm sure you found this too, with living artists who are excited to get feedback from the public. I mean, when I've been with artists and somebody says to them, well, why did you decide to do this size? Or why couldn't you do this, bigger, larger, fatter, whatever? It's always interesting to have the artist hear that feedback and think, oh, people really have specific requirements. Because
Hmm.
often when I say, well, why did you produce this image? It's, well, I had to. It just had to come out.
Oh,
Something in me made me do this, and this is what I want to do. And that's always so interesting to me, rather than people who will, produce infinite variations on one theme. I like this idea that artists are constantly searching and creating, and all over the world. But I only know about artists in Japan, but people in Japan, because the lockdown there was so restrictive, people really retreated within. And for some of our artists, it was wonderful. I mean, one woman who used to just do black and white ended up experimenting with color, and just had so much fun increasing her palette. Somebody who had always done representational work thought, what if I tried abstract? And so people had really, some people became incredibly depressed and didn't make anything.
yeah, I think that's true. I've said before on the pod that the pod is birthed during COVID, and it was because I thought, if this kills us all, I have things to say. Not shy. Does the gallery on either side of the ocean have historic material?
When my parents started their business, they really were interested in promoting the people whom they knew. And along the way, some ukiyo-e drifted into their collection and were sold. It's not something that we know a lot about. And with ukiyo-e and with the fact that there are so many different states and so many printings of very, really famous images, it really is best to leave that to the people who are specialists, because there are a lot of differences, and there's a lot of price differences too,
Oh, for sure.
even with posthumous work and work from the time of the artist. I myself, while I think probably intellectually I can appreciate the delicacy and the beauty of the printing of historic material, again, I think it's going back to this rapport with the artists. It's fun for me to show the work of people whom I know, who I've spent time with. I may have grilled them on, oh, how do I explain this technique, because somebody's going to ask me. And internet is wonderful. I love YouTube and all these people showing printing techniques so that I can just direct people to that, because it may be part of the Japanese character, but just as much as some people are so willing to share and maybe overshare, here what they're thinking about and what they're expressing with it. Japanese people really like their work to speak for itself, and they are often really reticent when I've said, "Oh, do you have a good artist statement for me?" They say, "Well, no, but people should look at the work, and the work should tell them what I want to do." But sometimes people want more than that. So.
Yeah, as a consumer and a curator or whatever, like I mean, I can guess at what they're trying to do, but you do want a little confirmation, I think. I do.
Right. Right. It is really nice to be able to sit down with somebody and say, tell me, in a few paragraphs, how I can convey what you're doing for other people. And as you know, it's true of anybody, I think. Some people are so good at articulating their thought processes, and other people just become tongue tied, and you know that they have a lot to say, but it's not coming out how they want it. And yet when you see their printed work, it's so assured and it's so elegant and graceful, and you think, what happened here?
Well, and the
So
other thing that happens, and I've had several artists tell me this over the years, that they're working along and they're producing a body of work that, say includes an element of this, that, or the other thing. And it's not until 15 years later that they recognize what it was they were trying to say. It can be a
to
problem.
me, it seems that that wouldn't be as true in Japan because people are so deliberate. They're so methodical in what they do. But I can't say I've met every single artist in Japan, so it's happening more and more that people become more confident with their English skills, and so they come to New York. And it's been fun meeting Japanese artists who are trying to make their way here and trying to figure out where they fit in. I mean, the print community, although it's, I mean, we're in the print community, you and I, Anne, so we
Mhm.
think that the print community is big, but it's just one tiny part of the art market. And I think for artists who, of course, they need to sell things to support themselves, they're always trying to figure out, how do I fit in? How can I fit in? I don't want to be a painter. I don't want to do photographs, but I know that a lot of our artists in Japan who support themselves primarily by teaching printmaking are so sad right now because they see that a lot of young people are not making prints. That the young people say to them, it's so laborious, it's so time intensive. But, if I'm on the computer and I can just generate all these effects and do it really quickly, and it's all of that is such a big, it's a bugaboo of mine. And I really hate it.
Yeah, no, it's heartbreaking.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the hand of the artist is everything
Yeah, I agree.
to me.
Yeah, the digital
So,
thing, we talk, it comes up all the time. There's no artist on the planet who's not going to use the latest tool to try and, shortcut some element of how they make things. But the hand of the artist is key. And straight up inkjet is, as Susan Tolman so succinctly said, the surface is just not that interesting. We need more.
but yet giclée are they can be beautiful. I mean, and so deceptive. And I have friends who are artists who've said, yes, but you don't understand. It's really hard to sell an original painting, but giclée are easy to sell. But and they're about making money.
Not easy to let go of the work because they want to still have the work or because of the price point for collectors.
The price point,
Okay.
yeah.
I'm not a fan.
No, to put it
No.
mildly.
It's hard, when people put up on their, artist prints now available, and I go to look, I'm like, wait, no, 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 no. This is the problem with the nomenclature, right? Like that's a print, and so
Right,
is what we do a print.
right, right. And that's one thing that I'm finding that I really have to do. As I said earlier, because I'm a private dealer, I participate in a lot of art fairs, and some of the print fair is it's certainly easy. People going to that fair, for the most part, know what prints are, know and respect and love prints. But for example, when I do the affordable art fair, there are many people who, when they hear print, they are immediately equating it to, oh, on the copy machine and you push print and there many copies come out. And once you educate people, you can just see their eyes widening. And, when they hear, this is what that person had to do to make this, it's so huge. And it makes me sad that we are not teaching more about printing because people are blown away. And then they think, and it's only that much money. I mean, they had to do all that work. And then if it's an edition of 20, they have to do it 20 times. And if they're different colors, I mean, and these people who sort of, approached my booth very cockily as in like, well, what has she got? And, what is this about prints? And all of a sudden, are just like, oh, thank you so much for letting me buy one of these. This is such an honor. Now that may
it
be because of my strict stance, because I don't let anybody touch anything at my table, but that's,
That's true. That is true. I reached for something the very first time I met you, and I got a tisk tisk. I was like, oh shoot, sorry.
Yes. And it's always the people who should know.
Right. Yes. I'm sorry. It was years and
But
years
speaking
ago.
of seduction, I mean, I think that is one thing in Japanese prints. They are the texture, the color, the imagery. It is very tantalizing. And if you see a whole pile of things, you think, well, what's underneath there? If this top one is so great, show me more. And unfortunately, I'm chatty. And so sometimes while chatting, I'm not, flipping the prints as rapidly as I could be. So note to self,
Right.
talk less, flip more.
But I mean, you have to do both. You have to, the education
Right.
piece is critical, right? It's
It's
so
it's crucial.
I know. I feel like we've been having the same conversation about educating the public about prints and printmaking since the 60s, when the print council started with their what's an original print
Mhm.
thing. It's so
But there
irritating.
but there are so many more print exhibitions now, and
True.
when you go to print exhibitions, they are full, and they're packed with young people who want to know. I mean, that to me is very exciting when you can get young people in an exhibition and they are not just documenting it on their cell phone, that they're really looking and they're rapt. I To me, that is just the best feeling.
Yeah. I guess yes, we had the same conversations in museums. Like, where's the next generation of museum
Right.
people, supporters, goers going to come from? And you got to get them early. Like, you can't start shuttering printmaking departments in colleges because then we're really screwed.
Right.
Yeah. Oh my God. Well, so when did you dive into another field and then come suddenly back and say, "Hey, mom and dad, I think I should do this in New York," or did you do this from get go?
No, I was an anchor woman on Japanese TV, started my
What?
senior year in college, and it was a really interesting show. It was, in fact, for our television program, which was a live broadcast from New York to Japan. They had to lay fiber optic cables in the Pacific Ocean. They did it for our show, I learned. It was a news program it was called, weirdly, The Big News Show. And it was on every Friday evening from 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. in Japan. And it was live. And there was a Japanese anchorman and a young Japanese anchorwoman in Tokyo, and a Japanese anchorman and yours truly in the studio in New York. And I had the signal honor of every Friday introducing the program. I would say, "It's Allison from New York." And then we would have the program. And it was really interesting because the news changes not only every week, but every day, every hour, every minute. And, we did all kinds of programs from, how people felt about Shogun. Remember
Oh, yeah.
to pregnant unwed teenagers, to interviewing Brzezinski, to interviewing Kissinger. I interviewed the head of the KKK.
What?
I mean, yeah, that was definitely unusual because the producer, unknown to me, I was still a senior in college, and one of my college roommates is African American, and the producer said, "Oh yes, and I've asked him to come in his robes," which
Holy cow.
was, I said to him, "I'm really sorry, I can't. I mean, I will. I'm. We will be interviewing you and hearing about your ideas, but I cannot shake your hand." And it was an interesting program. Anyway, I worked on that program for 5 years, and then one day I thought, I like to talk. And I really like to ask questions. And I don't want to just get all the soft news pieces. The Japanese anchorman, because he was much older and more serious, he got to do a lot of the serious news interviews. I was all of, let's see, I was 25, and I had read that you give 2 weeks notice before you quit a job. And so I had watched a program about American anchors and how much they made. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm not making that much money. I mean, this was a program about, Barbara Walters and all those people and so I went into the office the next day and said, "Well, I just watched a TV program last night and I'd like a raise." And they said, "Oh, Allison, you're, how, ha, ha, ha." And I said, "No, no, I'm serious. I mean, I wasn't good at the beginning. I could never see where the camera was. I mean, I would always be turned over here and they would be, the technical director would be waving his arms and saying, "Cameras over here," and because it was live, of course, people in Japan thought, what a nut she is. I'm sure, that wacky foreigner. But over the years, I did improve. Anyway, so I quit. And it was kind of interesting because the executive producer of the whole show flew from Japan to, now, Allison, now why would you quit? And I said, well, I asked for a raise. I wasn't good at the beginning. I'm better now. And I want a raise. I mean, I've been here for 4 or 5 years. And he said, well, surely, because this is Japanese culture, surely you're not living on what we pay you. Because in Japan, if you're a single woman, quite often you live at home to save money. And I said, oh, you must understand that my parents gave me a wonderful college education. And then they said, sayonara. And so
Right.
I certainly am. And he said, oh, well, we had no idea. Well, we could consider something. I said, nah, I've really enjoyed this job, but I'm done now. You weren't supportive when you could have been. You know, 25-year-olds are so self-important. And so then I thought, what do I know how to do that only I can do? And just at the same time, my roommate, who was another college roommate, she and I had been living together in New York. She also quit her job and she was working at Morgan Stanley and she knew all about business. And I said to her, I know what, let's be art dealers. My parents have done it. How hard could it be? And I called my parents and said, okay, Cheryl and I have this great plan. We're going to be art dealers. We know that we have to send some money for inventory. And then, and my mother, who had picked up the phone, said to my father, get on the other line. We have a problem. So my parents actually were incredibly supportive. They have never once ever said to me, told you so, because I had said to them, how hard could it be? You guys do it. It's been an incredibly fulfilling and yet challenging because, again, so many people know about the old prints, the ukiyo-e, even in museums. When I've tried so hard to meet museum curators to get them to understand that yes, they have these fantastic collections of old prints, but what people want to see is what happened in the interim. I spend a lot of time trying to encourage people, and it's hard. I mean, people love looking at the images, but I don't know, it's some people get it. And the most unlikely curators will say, you know what, I totally get this. And then other people who you think would be more sympathetic to the cause are just like, well, you know what, we just don't see quite how. So if you were to say to me, what's your biggest challenge? It's getting people to take contemporary Japanese prints seriously. Possibly, it is because a lot of them are really reasonable. And maybe that's why. I mean, sometimes people like it when things are very expensive because it means that there's a value to them.
So
I don't know
stupid.
why that is.
I feel like in American museums that are, encyclopedic of some sort, that when you say the Department of African Art or the Department of Korean or Asian as a whole, Toto, that means historic. And it's a rare museum that's tiptoed into contemporary in those regions. I mean, just when I was at the BMA, just starting to get a handle on contemporary art from various countries in Africa, because Africa's not a country,
Mhm.
people, surprise. And the same with Asia. Like there would be a little bit of maybe a contemporary Korean ceramic, something that would come in. Like it's very tiptoey. And I don't know what that's about. It's weird.
And then what is also this whole trend with museums to also telescope everything into one? To get rid of the print department
Oh
and
well.
to put it. Um, that's shocking. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole other yeah, it's heart failure time for me.
Hmm.
Yes, when they hand over the American prints and drawings to the American paintings person and, likewise the other areas, I mean, it makes sense sort of in a weird way, but it doesn't allow for the minutia that comes along with print collecting
Exactly.
that you don't know until you're in it, really, which is the problem. Those directors have no idea, I think. Sorry, people.
Right. And I think that it just speaks to the corporatization of a lot of museums that they think, well, it's art and we can just all lump it together. But But as you said, there's the minutia and there's a different way of looking. One looks at prints differently than how one examines a painting
Hmm.
or examines a textile. Our eyes are trained differently.
Do you think that's partly because there's so many variations and techniques that part of it is taking in concept and aesthetics, but also kind of reverse engineering how the artist got it made or made it themselves?
I think so because, I mean, again, not a painting person, but painting to me is, brushes and paints. But printing, I mean, you've got, stone and copper and zinc and wood. And I mean, there's so much that you can do. And so, yes.
Yeah, the variety, I think, is part of
Right.
it. Yeah, and I think it attracts a certain kind of mind, and you can see this play out with the curators. The painting curator, might be a 19th century French person in the collection, and their institution has maybe 200 paintings. And I think I would get bored. I think there's a kind of person who's like, "What else do we have? What can we do
Right.
next?" Keep digging.
Exactly. When I meet a curator, I typically say, listen, if you happen to have any 20th or 21st century Japanese prints, I am happy to come over and tell you what you have. There is this difficulty with sometimes being able to decipher a signature or read a title. Many Japanese artists want to be international, and so they will put the title on occasion in Roman letters, but not always. And so people end up having these things, they don't know what they have. And, some artists were really, really popular at one period. And then after that 10-year period, never made anything.
Let me just say, for me, there was a definite intimidation factor diving into the boxes with the Japanese prints, the historic Japanese prints, because
Oh,
like that such and such handed down his name. I'm like, what the hell are you people doing? How are we supposed to keep this all straight? And it's so intimidating. And the language barrier is just, ugh, it's tough. It's really hard.
well, this is why, and I do not remember the exact year, but it's at least 10 years. A brilliant person named John Resick invented ukiyo-e.org. And you can take a picture of your ukiyo-e and upload it to his site, and it will show you the same prints, all identified. I mean, it's amazing. When he started doing it, there are prints in the public domain, and he just started uploading them and working with them. And he didn't tell anybody about it. It was just something he was doing for himself. And all of a sudden, he realized this could be so helpful to so many people. So that is a huge, invaluable tool for people who don't read Japanese.
I did not know that.
Ukiyo-e.org.
Oh,
It is unbelievable.
ooh.
Yep.
It makes me want to go dive
Because to
back
take a
in.
picture of something that you don't know and then think, "Oh, it's at the Honolulu Academy. Oh, it's at the Art Institute of Chicago. Oh, it was, printed in 1853 and its title is blah blah blah." It's so wonderful if you don't speak Japanese.
Right. I was in Japan once in Tokyo, and I bought at the department store a contemporary image of the Hokusai wave. And do the inscriptions on those let you know that it's a contemporary, recutting of the block? I mean, is it easy to follow the progression of the image? Because the image keeps getting redone, right? Recarved?
Yeah, oh, exactly. You can tell which the original one because of the markings in the cartouche.
Okay.
And that tells you, which edition it
Okay.
was and the coloration and whatever. But it's I have learned from several ukiyo-e experts, look at the cartouche, because also apparently at one point the wood split and there are little, there's a little cut in the wood, and that's how you can tell if it's how early it is. The ones that are repros should not have any of those markings. They should just have the lovely, great wave.
Mine was, definitely a wood block, and it's, they had for the tourist trade, which is, it was
Hmm.
like $15. I was like, oh, that's fun.
Yes, and you saw that the last great wave, I think it sold for 1.6 million.
It did
This.
not.
Hmm.
Holy cow. That's a
And there
lot of
was one
money for a
last
print.
July that sold for 1 million. Yep.
Wow. That's heart stopping. If only you had one of those, Allison, you could retire.
But just imagine how if Hokusai knew, this
Oh,
person,
yeah.
he moved so many times. It is said that he never had quite enough money for the rent, and so he was constantly moving before his creditors caught up with him.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, funny.
So had he known that one of his images sold for $1.6 million, he would have been quite delighted, I hope.
I hope, yeah. So the other thing that's hard, there's so many cultural norms and differences in how things are done. So the name convention thing is always like, if you're not familiar with the surnames and the given names, like you can flip them around so easily in your head. And I think the museum, I don't remember how many Japanese prints the museum had, but I'm pretty sure that it was a mix. And for somebody like me, I was like, I can't tackle that. Like, I don't know how to sort all of that out.
Right, and nobody does because it's a foreign language for you. I mean, for example, in English, we know that that Smith is a last name. How are you going to know that Saito is a last name? I mean, it's very, very difficult. Yeah, I mean, simple things like that are challenging, I think, to a curator or to a collector.
Well, yeah, and you're already covering all, the entirety of Western printmaking history, and suddenly you're supposed to be
Right.
an expert in, Japan. It's very, like, I feel like there should be a foundation that funds, a 3-year project for a curator to go and catalog fully and completely, these pockets of prints all over the place, because I'm pretty sure they're all badly cataloged.
Well, the MFA Boston did get several years ago. The Museum of Fine Arts Boston has arguably, I think, the largest collection of ukiyo-e. The numbers range from 50,000 to 70,000 prints.
Oh God.
And there were, certain collections came into the museum's holdings with a stipulation that they couldn't be lent out. And there were curators at various times at the Museum of Fine Arts who, wouldn't even let the public make an appointment to see them. I mean, this is back in the 60s, apparently. There was this very eccentric curator who felt that the collection really was for him and he
Oh.
could study it, but nobody else could get in there.
Wow.
Luckily, the current curators are much more generous.
Right.
Um, but they received a grant that was matched, I think, by somebody else because of the sheer volume to digitize their collection. And in that process, they realized, just as you said, things had been miscatalogued, things had been misread. But it's what an undertaking. And
Oh
if
yeah, for sure.
if every institution could have that, it would be wonderful.
All right, well, so let's talk about some of your artists, because the imagery might surprise people. Like, I was delighting in the artist you have, whose name I can now not remember, the woman who kept having boats and things on her head.
Yes. So she
Fantastic.
is, and thank you for bringing up her name because I am excited. I mean, one of the things that I really have felt is very important is to promote more women artists. I mean, we know that there are so many wonderful artists, but as many of our artists who are women have told me, still in Japan, it is a much more traditional society still, and who is raising the family and who is making the dinner and who is that it usually is the woman. So it's hard to be a working artist and still want to be a wife and a mother. It's really challenging. And in fact, our new artist, her name is Kawamura Sayaka. So she's doing these wonderful water-based woodblocks, which, as you said, often have these women sort of staring out at the foreground. And her father and her grandfather were commercial fishermen. So she likes this idea of rendering homage to them by putting boats on the women's heads. And she said it's supposed to be sort of a dream feeling. That's why her colors are soft. But what I like about them is that they don't seem particularly of any country. I love the wood grain in them. I mean, I love the printing of them. I mean, her editions are small. They're either editions of 5 or 10. It's because they're big. And she said, I just can't, I can't print more than that. It would be really hard. I mean, she teaches full time. And I said, well, when do you print? And she said, well, I come home and after dinner, maybe I'll sketch something or I might carve, and then I print on the weekends. And she has a big big flat table in her, and she said, my apartment's small. Many apartments in Japan are small. And she will, with her baren, that burnishing disc, she'll run around the table and print part of it and then run around and print more. And she's so calm while she's telling all of this, which is lovely. She's amazing. I mean, what was really fun is that last November at the print fair at the Javits was the very first time that we had brought her work to New York. And because I've been in this world for a while, there are many people, many master printers who I know. I'm on the board of the Print Club of New York, so I know to say hello to people, but I don't know them well. And it was so exciting to have these people stop by the booth and like do a double take and say, "Who is this? Oh my God, look at this printing!" It was so affirming of, yay! I'm really glad that I'm showing this new artist because people get it. And then there were, the regular public who just thought these are fun and they're different. And especially what's interesting, because a lot of Japanese art is so small, they're big.
They
They're
are big.
31 by 31 inches or 39 by 39. That's a lot of woodblock. It
It
was it
is a
was
lot of
it was
woodblock.
really really gratifying because I often feel that I'm soldiering along, showing exquisite art that people think, well, this is not a known name that I've ever heard of. So could it be any good? So it was really, I felt really good. And she was very happy too. I mean, even though she didn't know maybe some of the master printers' names, just to hear that people in her field would recognize and appreciate what she's doing just wonderful.
I feel like there's part of the print curator, and maybe this, well, I don't know if this is true across the board, but I feel like because we have so many images in our brain by well known and not well known, that the lack of name recognition for me is not a problem. Like if the image is strong and can hold the wall and it's telling a story, I'm in, you know?
Right. But you are a secure person who's been looking at things for a long time.
Well, that's true.
So,
Okay, okay.
some people just think, I need my opinion validated. I haven't heard of this person, therefore are they any good? And curators shouldn't be like that. Curators, as you said, should really look to the strength of the image.
Well, and also with the internet, there's not some hierarchy of, Jasper John sitting on top of a pile of, white men. Like there's so many people that you can't possibly know all of them. And I don't know. I think in the age of the internet, you have to just be much more open to names that you don't know.
Hmm.
That's my personal
Yeah.
opinion.
Well, and the print fair does a good job in
Yes.
having all of these people come together and bring a host of work that you and it's such a great way to be able to see things in person. I know the internet is wonderful in terms of opening our minds, but there's nothing like seeing something in person and really being able to go up close and think, wow, look at that line, how did they do that? you know
Yeah. No, I agree too. Because prints require close looking, as I've said before.
yep.
To appreciate the labor and the passion of the artist and the help of the collaborative printer if there is one, and the team, and everybody's trying to make this thing sing, and we all just want you to love it and take it home with you.
Right. Yeah, that's one thing, as I mentioned at the beginning, it does set Japanese prints apart, that there are not there certainly have been, artists who collaborated together, but it's not a common thing. And especially now, people really enjoy working on their own and producing their own work and being responsible for every stage of that process.
Does that mean that there are fewer what you would think of in America as publishers in Japan?
Yes. Yes.
Huh.
Most of the artists would say that they self-publish.
Okay. And do you think that's because they can do it at home in between feeding the kids and getting them to bed?
Or they have a printing press or they have access to a studio where they can go and make prints and do it on their own time. Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely.
Interesting. It's funny. I am just so um, fascinated and curious about how the systems become what they are in various places in the world. And it's all, I'm sure, cultural norms and roles and all that kind of stuff. But it's fascinating. Hmm.
Another cultural norm that I find very interesting, and I wasn't aware of it for a very long time, I should have been, I just hadn't been thinking about it, is the roles that professors play. So there are a number of, well-regarded art universities in Japan. And of course, if you've graduated from one of those universities, it's all the better because you've probably studied with a renowned professor who will then recommend you to a gallery to have a show there and get your career going and whatever. And it's always so interesting when I meet artists, and quite often, after meeting them, they'll immediately say, "Oh, and I graduated from blah blah blah." And you think, I don't care where you graduated from. That, that, but it's just a way of they're letting you know what circle they're part of,
Huh.
and or not. And conversely, I met a woman a few years ago, really really liked her work, and she said, "Oh, it's such delight to talk to you. You're from the Tolman family. I know your family's had a gallery for such a long time, but I'm sure you won't want to represent me." And I said, "Well, why not?" And she said, "Well, I didn't go to any of those fancy, to any of the big art schools." And I said, "Well, so what? I mean, I don't care." I said, we're an American. I mean, our company, our mother company, literally is in Japan, but our thoughts are American, and we don't care where you went to school. It really is the work." And she was so delighted. She said, "Oh, I've had a really hard time getting gallery representation because of my lack of academic qualifications." It was so interesting.
Wow. That is interesting. I mean, I think there's probably people who fling "I went to Yale" around. Maybe, I don't know. Yes, they do. Actually, I've met them. But it is, I think, I mean, you sort of compare notes. I went to Micah, I went to RISD, but it's not, unless sometimes if you're in Prince, well, I promote that too. When I was studying Hayter, all of Hayter's people went out to all these various places, Petterdee at Yale and Lasansky in Iowa, whatever. And so I'm always saying, "Oh, you went to Iowa. That means you have an H number and you can trace your lineage back to Hayter." So I'm sort of promoting this retarded terror kind of idea.
You see how
Oh, well.
insidious it is?
Exactly.
But
Oh,
in a
that's
way, it makes sense in Japan because education is so prized there, and therefore one's professors. But I never had realized quite what a mafia these professors and their recommendations were.
and are there women professors in this cadre?
Oh yes, yep.
Okay,
And the
good.
and the male professors, I mean, have both male and female students, and if you're a good student, they're going to say how great you are. One thing that is often in the world of contemporary Japanese ceramics, you hear about these lineages of families. The knowledge of making a pot is passed down. That is very uncommon in Japan. The biggest example is the Yoshida family. And I don't know if you saw at the print fair in Catherine Martin of Schulten's booth. She had the Yoshida women, so all these different women who made wood blocks. It was a really, really interesting show. But usually, if somebody is a printmaker, nobody else in their family is.
Oh, wow.
It's a hard life,
Right, right.
and not everybody is creative through the generations. So the Yoshidas were really unusual.
Huh. You would think that it would get passed down because if, like actors, if you're the child of an actor, you're more likely to be an actor than anything else, like because you're
Yeah,
in that world, like you being a gallerist. Huh.
right,
Interesting.
right.
Hmm. Huh. Who else do you have in your stable that you want to tell us about?
Okay, we've covered Kawamura Sayaka, who is 33, but I think I would also like to talk briefly about Toko Shinoda, and she is the one who I was saying, she died 2 years ago at the age of 107. She was an amazing. The word trailblazer has been given to her so many times, but I think it's true. I mean, imagine she was born in 1913. She lived through so much of world events. She came from Japan to the United States in, I guess, the mid to late 50s. Her older brother had a friend in New York who could sponsor her. And she really wanted to come to New York and learn how that, for her, that was the center of the art world. And she spoke very little English. She lived in this fifth floor walk up. And she had to have the shower going at all times to make the rooms humid enough so that she could paint.
Oh, my.
And it was just always so interesting to spend time with her. And she had decided from a very young age that she was going to be an artist, and she learned calligraphy. And at one point she thought, well, I might have to support myself by teaching calligraphy, but she was not a very patient person. So I'm sure she would have been a rotten teacher. But she did paint, and she came to New York to make paintings, and she was handled by Betty Parsons. She first was at the Bertha Schaefer Gallery, and then with Betty Parsons for a long time. At one point, she went to Philadelphia and met Arthur Flory. And Arthur Flory, who was an incredible lithographer, said, your paintings, if you ever made prints, you should really think about making lithographs. Your work is so suited. And she herself was completely uninterested in making prints. But she thought, well, if you make editions, then more people can buy them. And she could have taught classes at Harvard Business School. She's a very business-oriented artist. Anyway, so I guess Arthur Flory showed her what lithographs were like, and she went back to Japan and met Kimura Kihachi, who was a master lithographer, and they collaborated for decades. He ended up retiring in 2007, and she said, good, I'm going right back to painting. Not
Oh,
making any more lithographs. But her lithographs were always very interesting because the edition would be pulled, and then she would add by hand. Each print in the edition would be the same, but she would, whatever hand colored area there was, she would add that by hand herself. So,
oh
and
gosh.
they're all gestural and beautiful and minimalist.
Fascinating. So she did have a collaborative partner in the lithographer. Fascinating.
Well, I guess because he printed her work,
Yeah.
and she was the only artist who we represent who had a printer who was separate from the artist,
Huh.
herself.
Oh, wow. Well,
Everybody
that's
else we
cool.
show does their own printing.
Right. Do you show, I forget see the names. They're so hard for me. The guy who does the umbrellas and the bicycles.
Yes, Shigeki Kuroda. And
That's him.
so Kuroda-san has been doing that, again, talk about decades. He hit on that. He wanted to convey the passage of time, and he thought, well, if you're moving on a bicycle, if you don't move, you'll fall off. So therefore, and he loved the idea that the umbrellas are a half circle, wheels are a circle, so it's those two shapes going together. But a funny story is that many many years ago, the trade magazine of the Japan Police Association contacted my parents and said, we would like to use an image of one of your artists on the cover of our magazine. It's an artist, Shigeki Kuroda, bicycles and umbrellas. And so my parents, got Kuroda-san's permission. The image was put on the magazine. I think a few policemen may have showed up at the gallery to maybe buy the print. It was very exciting. And then about a month after that, we received a letter from the association saying, while we have enjoyed the use of this beautiful image, please note that in Japan it is dangerous to operate a bicycle while holding an umbrella. So just speaks to the seriousness of Japan.
Oh my god. Oh, Jesus. Compositionally, it just works perfectly. Yeah, I wasn't really about to try it myself. I confess.
Now, how do you
Oh.
know? How do you know Shigeki Kuroda?
Before I started the podcast, I was blogging. At the beginning of the pandemic, when I thought everyone was going to die, I started writing, and there's just sort of reminiscences about things that I had bought for the collection at the BMA or not bought and wished I had, and at some point, because it was shut down, there were several print fairs that were online at the same time. And so I did these posts that were just like one thing from each of the vendors in that
Mm-hmm.
particular fair. And I put a Kuroda up because I ride bikes myself with a bunch of girlfriends. And one of my friends, who's sort of the captain of our team, bought one of them. And so I saw it yesterday in her house because she has a new puppy. I had to go see the new puppy. And there it was. It's like, oh, yeah, yeah. I forgot you bought that. It was awesome. So just came into my
I
brain.
think for me, what's been wonderful with his work is, again, showing prints from such, a specific part of the world, and, Japanese prints, even if they're made by a variety of people, there is something about the aesthetic that is very similar. So sometimes people will be a little bit intimidated, as in, well, I don't know about this Japanese. Oh, it's Japanese, and I don't know anything about Japan. But Umbrellas and bicycles, everybody knows what those are. And so it's a very reassuring image as well. You don't have to think, do I have to be smart to know what these are about?
Oh, yes, right.
They're just beautiful. But again, they're beautifully executed. Recently, because he's developed some mystery pain in his arm, though, he's been doing a lot of watercolors, and he's really gotten away from etching because he's just found that it puts so much tension on his arm.
I always wonder about artists, when you're a curator and you don't know them like you do, you can see the trajectory of their work, and sometimes somebody will give up, like Holtzius gave up engraving for painting or whatever, and you just wonder, was there a new pain? Was there an ache? There's some arthritis that popped up and they just couldn't do that anymore. Hader too, he gave up the Buren for a long time. And I thought, I wonder what's going on there.
Did you ever find out why?
No, I didn't. And he returns to it, but not with the same kind of intensity of his youth. Although, no, that's not really true. I mean, he just was more. He turned more to the open bite, the big open bite
Right.
sort of stuff.
Right.
Yeah, and I wondered if he was, his hand was tired.
Well, which makes sense,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
One of the things I always thought was so interesting about the Haters, about Atelier 17, was how many Japanese people went there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, it must have been such a wonderful experience for them to be in a completely foreign country, but doing something that they knew how to do. But it just sounds as if the whole atmosphere was so enriching and so creative, to have all these people in there at once.
Yeah, I think so. The last time I was at the Atelier, because it's still open under another name, Atelier Contrepoint, but in 2015 I was there, and there were a couple of Japanese artists there working on plates. Yeah, it still continues to this day. It's amazing. The director of the current iteration, Hector Saunier, printed for Hader in the later editions.
Mm-hmm.
Hader died in '88, and his partner and master printer Shu Lin Chen is Chinese, so it's has been international since they moved back to Paris in the '50s. Well, since they came to New York, I guess.
Which I love, because printmaking should be global. I mean, this is something that everybody can do everywhere. You can use incredibly developed tools, but you can also use really simple things too to make a mark.
Yeah,
and I love that.
Yeah. So who else? Who are you excited about?
I spoke about two women, and so I think it's time to switch over to the guys for a bit. So, an artist who's been working for a very long time, Kawachi Seiko, was born in 1948, so he's 75. He is, I think, probably the most voluble person I have ever met. I mean, you and I are quite chatty. My dad is an incredibly verbose person, but verbose sounds bad. I mean, just the volume of words is a lot. But Kawachi-san, and to my experience, a lot of Japanese artists are, they speak when spoken to, they're very much in their heads. But we were very excited because, again, brought Kawachi-san's woodblocks. They're a combination of sort of woodblock, but also intaglio. And when he was 40, he realized the importance. It's funny how this conversation keeps on coming back to Hokusai. He realized the importance of Hokusai, and he started making a lot of woodblocks that referenced famous images from Hokusai. They're very intense. I mean, it's almost as if somebody is just, gesturing with their hands and talking really loudly, and the colors are bright and they're very intense, and they're not like other artists in Japan, which are much more quite often restrained, and things stay within the lines and everything is peaceful. And Kawachi-san is none of that. And one of the themes that he's been using for a long time is chickens. And chickens. I mean, okay. And I said, no, Kawachi-san, I really need to know, because people look at your work, and quite often the first thing they do is, they do get the reference of the Great Wave or the whirlpools of Naruto or whatever. But then they see the chickens. And what is this about chickens? And he said, well, I feel, and I felt it for a long time, that Japanese people are cooped up, just like chickens are cooped up. And we're all, just crammed in together, and there's no time to think or be one's own self. And so I'm releasing them, letting them fly away so that people can have their own path. And he went on talking a blue streak for about an hour and a half. I mean, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to explode. I had just gotten off the plane, so I was having jet lag and then having all this information coming at me. I mean, it was kind of great, but every time I look at his work, I think you, the person who made these prints, you're exactly the way the prints are,
Mm.
which is fun. And what was so wonderful was at the print fair is having people just respond to them with that same kind of joyous intensity as in, and tell about the chickens. So they're they are really really different. He too, I mean, he taught for a long time at one of the big art universities, and he's a very well respected art professor who recently retired. And I said, you must have, had an illustrious career because of your pedigree. And he said, nah, people don't like me because I talk too much, and I just, did whatever I wanted to do, and that's what comes out in my work. And it's true, and it's kind of great, and it's one of the wonderful things about being able to handle living artists, so that you can try and convey their personalities through their work
Right.
in a way that you can't if you haven't met the person.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's true. Huh. It's such a different world, and I feel like, to me, super accessible. Like, the prints are, I mean, some of them are challenging, but they're not Vaskin or something,
Right.
right? Like, you can you can get in there, and some of them are just downright gorgeous. Most of them are downright gorgeous, and yeah, I feel like it's a you're in a niche in a niche in a niche.
Yes, definitely. And sometimes I'm happy to be in that niche, and but sometimes I wish that people knew, and I think that this wonderful service that you're doing will hopefully have more people, start thinking about Japanese prints and what a great and important part they are of the print world, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, people use the term mokuhan all the time.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think people assume, for whatever reason, that contemporary Japanese printmaking is all mokuhanga, which is completely not true, obviously, given your collection. So it's so funny. And I feel like the mokuhanga people, no offense, April, are,
Yeah.
they stick together. I don't know. It's weird.
But it's
I don't
amazing
know.
how international it is, because I was just, thank you, Florence Neal, just invited and just juried the International Mokuhanga Conference for, those prints will be on view next April. And
Oh,
the
great.
submissions were from all over the world.
Uh,
And it was so fun because I thought, oh, Mokuhanga, it'll be either, you know, the United States and Japan, but no, Australia and many, many European countries
mhm.
was so interesting.
Yeah.
So,
It's a cool talk about something you can do at home, like it's really,
right.
I think if I were
Right.
to start printmaking, I'd probably start there. I'm no good.
We shall see. We won't hold you to
That's right.
it.
So my last question for you is there a succession plan for your parents' gallery? What will happen when they decide to retire?
Well, my dad is 87 now. And a couple of years ago, we transferred the ownership of the gallery to me.
Okay.
So I own both the Tokyo and the New York offices. But we have an incredibly wonderful, competent, and capable staff in Tokyo. So I wouldn't change a thing. I love to go to Japan. I can see my dad. I can see our team. I can see the artists. And very interestingly, I don't have any children, but my nephew, Luca Martino, has already written a book on one of our artists, the stencil printmaker Takashi Hiromitsu. And Luca is very interested. I mean, he's helped me at many an art fair, and he may well be the third generation of Tolmans to continue the business.
I wondered, I forgot to ask about him. I'm glad you brought him up because there's a video on your website with you and him talking about the book that he wrote. And I thought, he looks like he's 12.
Well, he just turned 20.
Wow. And he's got a
So he
book.
wrote the book when he was 17.
Oh my God.
Um, he spent the summer visiting my dad, his grandfather, in Japan, and he was so captivated by these stencils. And again, if you look at a lot of the kabuki actor prints, they really, I think that their movements and their dynamism fueled a lot of the anime that you see right
Oh,
now.
sure.
And I think that that's what really interested, because Luca's young. Maybe that's what he saw in the movement of these stencil prints that really, he decided, well, I want to interview this artist and I want to write about him. And a book happened, which really showing me up because I've been talking. My parents have written several books on contemporary Japanese prints, and I keep on saying I'm gonna do one too, but from my own perspective. And Luca beat me to it, so
Oh, well, but he's focused
I
on
will get
one
there.
artist, so you would do something
Right,
more wide ranging,
right,
probably.
right.
Yeah. Well, I'll help if you need help.
Thank you.
That'd be cool. Yeah. It's such a, I feel like I need to, well, I know you won't let me paw through your drawers, but I do, I feel like I need
Ooh.
a more satisfying primer than just running into you at the fairs, you know?
Well, the next time you're in New York, come over because I have flat files. Believe me, we could
I
bring
believe
out a
it.
bunch of things and have you look at them and really see things in depth.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So everybody, Allison is open, but by appointment. She has a life.
yeah, and a schedule.
Yeah. Right. And a schedule. Right. And she's going to be writing a book soon. Anything else that we want to tell people about you and your enterprise?
No, again, I'm incredibly grateful for you letting me talk about my world and the little tiny place in the print world that I occupy, but that I'm so thrilled to do this and to do what I do every day. So thank you for letting me talk about it.
Oh, sure. It sounds kind of heavenly, really, to be. I mean, I think I missed my calling, honestly. I should have been many things. One, I should have been a print publisher, and then I should have been a private dealer. And then if, I had all the money, I'd just be a collector because I don't really want to sell
Right.
anything. Start a new print museum, National Print Museum. I got plans.
Yes.
Too many things to do. Yeah. Anyway, well, thank you for coming on Plate Mark, Allison. You're a delight, and I'm glad we had the time to do this. It's been really great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Plate Mark with Allison Tolman. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. She's a delight, and I love talking to her. A special thanks to her for being a wonderful guest. And as usual, thanks going to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music, Dan Fury of Extension Audio for sound mixing and first pass at editing. Thank you, Dan. And also a thank you to Lee Turner and Skip Barnhart for the use of their studio sounds in the opening soundscape. You guys are awesome. Please go over to platemarkpodcast.com if you value the content that I'm producing and hit the support and donate button. It is it's a labor of love, so your support would be much appreciated. I think that's it. Is that it? I think that's it. Oh, you should come over to Facebook and join our Platemark Facebook group. There's a bunch of people in there, and we're all just chit-chatting away. So come on over, join, jump in the lake, as it were. All right, we'll see you next time.